containing communism, that we are protecting the Vietnamese freedom. But that's really going to contract with what the Vietnamese are really thinking and feeling at this time. And that's really why America is going to lose this war. We're going to see a loss of American support for this war, especially as a lot of what's happening during the war becomes really public information. There's a lot of things about the war that was being hidden. You guys saw that with the Pentagon Papers, for an example. And then we're going to have a lot of atrocities committed by Americans during this war, such as the My Lai massacre, and which, when this information becomes public and when the American public actually sees this information, they're going to kind of stop and say, wait a minute, why are we fighting? And eventually, throughout this long, drawn-out conflict, we are going to see the American support being eroded away, which you do have a video on here if you guys want to read or watch a little bit more about the War Powers Act and a little bit about how presidential power is expanding at this time. You can do so. It's optional though. It's a supplemental video. Okay, so now we're going to look at Nixon. And Nixon has a very interesting really role to play in the Cold War. So we have that escalation of the Cold War, and that tip of that escalation, that iceberg, is really going to be Kennedy. And from there on out, we kind of just have a de-escalation almost in these tensions in this, Cold War that's heating up into an actual Cold War. Well, now it's cooling off. And so Nixon's foreign policy is going to be characterized by what we call the detente, which is the idea that the Soviet Union and the United States is not, here, I'll put this down here. The Soviet Union and the United States is not the same country. They have vastly different ideologies, vastly different ways of doing things, but that doesn't mean that we can't both exist on this planet. And that's what Nixon's foreign policy was all about, was about recognizing that the Soviet Union, while being drastically different from us, doesn't mean that they don't have, or doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to have the kind of economic system in which, and political, communism is both political and economic, that they have. So in 1972, we are going to see a great decline in tensions with the SALT and anti-ballistic missile treaty, in which we basically agree with the Soviet Union to stop building up nuclear missiles and different systems, particularly like systems for stopping other missiles from coming in. So the whole idea of not only attacking but defending with nuclear weapons, we are going to stop actually trying to expand these programs and stop some of this research, which is a major cool down for these Cold War tensions. So it really kind of starts really slowing down and stopping the arms race that was happening during the Cold War. This is interesting at this time, though. It's interesting because as Nixon is talking about establishing peace abroad with China and with the Soviet Union, which, by the way, Nixon was the first president to go into China. And he is the president who kind of resolves some tensions we have with China during this time. And he's also the president who stopped supporting Taiwan. So you have that. So while you have Nixon going forth trying to have this idea of we need to have peace, even if people have different economic systems even if they're different, they have different ideas, it's okay, we need to peacefully coexist. While he's doing this, there is also a lot of different CIA missions taking place and a lot of different foreign policy decisions being made by Nixon to fund different operations to go in and to actually kill dictators or leaders of countries that were against Americans at this time, and to provide weapons to dictators and countries in which those dictators were pro-American at this time. So we see this during Nixon's presidency in Iran, the Philippines, and South Africa. So America at this time, while perpetuating and sounding like we're supporting peace with these major players in the Cold War, we're actually influencing or attempting to really influence different small conflicts in different countries in an attempt to create developed nations that would support the United States and would maintain America's economic dominance, maintain a good relationship with the United States so that we could have free trade and hopefully these people would consume American goods. So it's about maintaining that military power and this economic power at this time. All right, guys, we're almost done. Really quick, the last thing we're going to talk about is the anti-war movement and the counterculture. So I want you guys to understand that the counterculture is all about fighting back against that consensus of the 1950s, fighting back against these ideas that middle class, suburban life, that kind of ignored or pushed underneath the rug some of these real social issues within the United States. And the counterculture was all about fighting back against that, the culture that swept these things underneath the rug. This movement was generally among the youth at this time. In addition, the youth not only was against this counterculture, but also the government. So kind of rise in people not trusting in the government, especially as those Pentagon Papers you guys saw in the John Green video. The Pentagon Papers released to the American public that the executive branch wasn't really being honest or forthcoming with information. And this movement is going to be about really not supporting the policy of containment and not supporting America to mingle in the affairs of other nations. So it's basically a counterculture or counter movement against a lot of the things that's taking place both in the 50s and the 60s, culturally and with our foreign policy. You also have the counter movement at this time, or counterculture, really start defining freedom as individual liberty. The idea that as an individual, I should do what I want to do, be who I want to be. And people stepping in the way, that is people trying to deny me of my freedom. So that's the way in which this counterculture and the youth at this time are really viewing these things. And that's what their movement is all about. If you guys see in this picture, you do have Woodstock, which I'm sure you guys have heard of Woodstock, a celebration at this time of this counter movement, people getting together, celebrating their way of life and celebrating their counterculture. You also have, in the upper corner here, you have these Students for a Democratic Society. And down here in the bottom right corner, you see people protesting against Vietnam and social issues domestically. And Students for a Democratic Society was an organization within this counterculture that pushed for an end to the war in Vietnam and pushed for social change. So all these things are really heating up. And what you're going to see next week is this counterculture and all of these things are going to accumulate into drastic change. And that's really because next week we're going to look at the 60s. And well, after spring break. But next time we have class, we're going to be looking at the 60s and looking at the rapid change that is all happening. And this rapid change is only possible because of the 50s. All right, guys, stay safe. Finish your homework. Make good life decisions. Have a good spring break. Bye-bye.